Hi everybody, it's Ryan, and today we're going to be looking at fiscal policy, the Laffer curve, or when are taxes too high. What we're hoping to do with the Laffer curve is to try to figure out how much tax is too much tax to charge on your citizens. And so this is a BBC News article from a few years ago, and it listed the countries that have the highest and lowest take homes of a person who's earning on a high salary. So in Italy, someone who's on a high salary only actually takes home 50% of what they earn. Whereas in a place like Saudi Arabia, where there's, I think, no income tax, they take home 96% of that. The UK sort of comes in right here. You would recognize that as being that's 100% minus the top rate of tax. Just about, so that 57%. And another way to think about it is to look back at the classic Beatles song from 1966. It's called Taxman. It's written by George Harrison, and he's talking about this 95% super tax, which was introduced by the UK government at the time, which he was protesting against. And so that's why there's this famous line in that lyric where he says, "If 5% appears too small, be thankful I don't take it all. I'm the tax man." And that's because he was a young musician from Liverpool, and he was not very happy with the fact that the government was saying that as a high earner, he might have to pay a 95% marginal tax rate, which is obviously very high. So typically what we'll do is we'll start this off with a thought experiment to illustrate the idea of the Laffer curve. So if you are a worker, you leave college and you're now working, you've got a job that maybe say pays £20 an hour, and you can work a maximum of 40 hours a week. And if everything else is constant, if the only thing we're changing is the tax rate, and we change the tax rate from say 0 all the way up to 100%, I'll let you do this on your own if you want to, but typically what you see people put down is they say, okay, if I've got a 0% tax rate, sure, I'll work 40 hours because I might as well earn a lot of money. If I've got a 20% tax rate, then yeah, I'll probably still work about the same, maybe a little bit less, but typically people say about 40 hours. 40% tax rate, you start thinking, okay, I'll work most of that, but the last 10 hours, maybe I'd rather do something else with, because I know that I'm not actually earning everything for myself now. It's getting pretty hefty, this tax bill. Up to 60%, and the effect is even worse. You're like, okay, well, I'll earn a little bit, but I'm only keeping, 60% of that gets taxed. At 80%, it's like, well, what's the point, right? Maybe I'll work a few hours to get the money that I need, but I'm not going to work very many because the government's taking 80%. And obviously, if the tax rate is 100%, most people say, well, I don't want to work then, because what's the point? So if you do the calculations, that's the amount of income that you earn just based on the hourly wage of £20 an hour. And then what you find on the final column is the total tax that the government gets. And so the total tax in the first instance, obviously they charge nothing, so they get zero income tax. If they're charging 20%, they see a bump in their tax revenue. Then at 40%, another bump. And then at 60%, it's actually coming down again because of the fact that people have started to work less because of the behavioral effect of that tax. Finally, at 80%, they're not earning as much revenue as they were even at a 20% tax rate. And obviously at at 100%, they're going to earn zero tax paid. And that, in a nutshell, is really what the Laffer curve is meant to do. The Laffer curve is named after this guy, Arthur Laffer. He was an economic advisor to Ronald Reagan, and he sort of struck out with fame on this one. Even though it's a pretty simple concept, other people had described it before, but I guess he was in the right place at the right time and had the right people listening to him. But apparently he came up with the idea for this on the back of a napkin, and as he was talking to other people in one of the, I think it was Ford's government. He was a Republican economic advisor to several different governments. And this is what he came up with. And this is the thing that's useful to know. This is the kind of thing you want to have in notes, which is you've got your tax revenue on the y-axis and your tax rate on the x-axis. And you think, right, well, what's our tax revenue going to be if the government has different marginal tax rates? And so the first thing is you say, well, below this T star, the government will increase their revenue by increasing the tax rate. Taxes are higher, but they're not very high. People keep working, so the more the government taxes, the more tax revenue they're going to raise. All right? Then you get beyond this point here, and then the government revenue decreases as they increase their marginal tax rate, because people decide that they want to stop working, or they find ways to avoid paying tax. And eventually, They come down here at 100%, the government's not going to make any revenue. And so this T-star might be what you call the tax revenue maximizing rate of taxation. And that's where we're defining this T-star being, is this maximizing point. And the point of this is, and this is what Arthur Laffer was getting into, is that if we're beyond T-star, if taxes are too high, then you can actually increase government revenue by reducing taxes. And that was his argument in the late 70s, early 80s. Let's reduce the marginal tax rate from, I think what was then in the US, 70% down to 35% was what it is today. Same thing here in the UK, is that Margaret Thatcher came into a situation where I think marginal tax rates were in the 80 percentile. And she said, right, well, let's bring it down. And I think she got it down to the 40 percentile for the highest marginal tax rate. And the argument being that it didn't hurt the government finances too much, because by reducing the marginal tax rate, you get people to work more, and maybe people were just avoiding paying those taxes anyway because the rate was so high. So that's it. It's pretty simple. The key thing that you want to look at is, what is that T-star? And to be honest, nobody really knows this. Everyone's looking around for evidence to say, what is it? Obviously, it's not 0, it's not 100%. This is something that I found here, which was based on a study, and they said that they suggest that the optimal rate of tax is in the vicinity of 70%. So if you want to look at this study, then you might think that 70% is an optimal study. This is based on 2 economists and endorsed by Paul Krugman, who's quite trustworthy. So that's one thing to look at. I mean, another way to look at it is to look at some recent UK evidence. The UK in the early part of the 2010 coalition government was messing around with a 50% tax rate on the higher earners. And I think that was actually carried over from the previous Labour government. The previous Labour government introduced it, and pretty soon into the coalition government, George Osborne, a member of the Conservative Party and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, said, let's do away with that. And this is the news article from that time, and this is the key point here, is that George Osborne was gleeful in telling Parliament that they only raised about £1 billion, less than the 2.5 billion that Labour had predicted would happen as a result of having the 50% tax. So it would seem that it probably wasn't a great idea to have the 50% tax rate. It was not to the right of T-star. It just meant that they didn't earn as much as they thought they would have, because you're sort of approaching T-star. You're getting to the point where you're thinking, well, how much money are we actually going to raise? Now, something else you want to look at, again, we said it's a very simple concept, this Laffer curve thing, and Arthur Laffer was not the first person to look at it. If you really want to get into it, check out James Mirrlees. He was a British economist and a Nobel Prize winner in the mid-90s for his work on this, and he did some analysis on this, and he came up with some ideas on this in the 1960s, and looking at the idea of information asymmetry in the tax system, and what could be the possible optimal rate of tax. And this is just a quick extract from his obituary. It says, higher rates for higher earners were thought to promote equality, but they also risk productive workers cutting their hours because their extra effort is taxed at a higher rate. So same idea, just a different person saying it. This guy is a proper Nobel laureate economist, so it's not too controversial. It's just, I guess, the context, the political context in which people are putting forward this argument. And Mirrlees has a review, this famous sort of tax system review that was published, and yeah, so big brain in the idea of public finances there. So why is this useful? So when can you use the Laffer curve? The Laffer curve will be useful when evaluating whether or not income taxes should be lower. And that's pretty much it, right? So as an example, you might get a question which says, evaluate whether the top rated tax should increase from 45% to 50%. Currently 45%, should it go up to 50? Well, on the one hand, yes, we should do it, right? Because it would raise revenue and make the tax system more progressive, more fair. And that's a good thing, right? The people with the broadest shoulders should pay the most tax. And there's your argument for it. And then the argument against is say, well, actually, let's say let's bring the Laffer curve in. Maybe we won't actually raise any more revenue from this. Maybe we'll get towards or approach this T star, and it doesn't raise as much as you might expect. An interesting figure here is that I think they did a review on this in 2014 after they abolished the 50% rate of tax, and they said bringing it back in would only raise 100 million pounds, according to HMRC. So maybe it's not a good idea, and maybe it's going to sort of send the wrong signal to people who want to work and make money in the UK. A way of looking at this in a bit more detail is this news article from 2014. So if they brought back in, this is before the 2015 election, and Ed Balls, before he was in Strictly Come Dancing, was the shadow chancellor. And so he was saying that he wanted to bring back in the 50% top rate. HMRC said, go ahead and do it, but it's only going to bring it up to it's only going to raise 100 million pounds. The argument for is that, yeah, bring it in, it's a fairer tax system, but the critics say that actually it's a less attractive place to start, finance, and grow a business. It's not going to be the kind of place where you want to set up something if you know that you're going to be taxed at 50% rate. And there's more information on this. Check out the link in the description because you can read this article in full, but it just goes through, it's people saying it's either a good or a bad idea.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you check out the description for other interesting videos and cool links on this topic. If you found this video useful, make sure you give it a like and be sure to subscribe to this channel for other economics videos.